Chapter 7. Before we had seen the living quarters. Now the prince led the way to his studio, and the breath went out of me as I stepped through the door into 40 captured sunsets. I was in the presence of genius. Paintings and sketches were everywhere, and they were alive. I could swear that real sap was flowing through painted trees, and real dew was dripping from flowers. The most extraordinary thing was the glowing light that seemed to come from inside the paintings. And the prince smiled at the stunned expression on my face. "It's just a trick, Ox," he said modestly. "It's called po mo. And it means the technique of applying dark ink over light. The effect is scarcely noticeable when you first put it on, but when it dries, it gives the effect of glowing with inner light, like focused eyes, my teacher used to say." "Ah, you studied with 3 incomparables?" Master Li asked. "Li Kao, you know everything," the prince said admiringly. "Yes, I was his student for several years, and he was without doubt the most disagreeable man I've ever met." He graciously included me in the conversation. "His name is Ku Kai Chi, but he's called 3 Incomparables because of his boast that he's incomparable in painting, in genius, and in stupidity. Unquestionably, he's the greatest master of Po'omo in the empire." "He used to be, but you surpassed him long ago," Master Li muttered. "Prince, this is incredible work. But have you considered the likelihood of disgrace and exile?" "Oh, I have no intention of showing my paintings," the prince said. "This is practice. I'm trying to learn, and I have a long way to go." Being back in his beloved studio had done wonders for him. It was as though the smell of paint had wiped away the recent experiences, and his eyes were shining happily. "Ox, Master Li means that our overlords have decreed that all art must follow supposedly classical techniques, which are set down in a manual called Mustard Seed Garden," he explained. "Rocks, for example, may only be painted using cow strokes for outline, po strokes for the tops and sides, sun strokes for texture, and sa strokes for expression. Any other technique can lead to a trial and exile." Master Li laughed at the expression on my face. It gets worse, he said. "Sunstrokes, for example, are broken down into the exact lines suitable for individual rocks. Curling cloud strokes, axe cut, split hemp, loose rope, ghost face, skull-like, wood pile, sesame seed, golden blue, jade powder, spear hole, pebbles, and boneless. An artist who uses ghost face for painting granite instead of the officially approved axe-cut faces 6 years in the Mongolian desert." The prince waved around the room. "You are looking at approximately 1.5 million years' worth of exile," he said proudly. He was becoming quite animated, and he eagerly tossed aside paintings from a pile on the floor, and came up with a simple sketch of a tree. "Laws are liars," he said. "Look here. Every single law of painting insists that the movement force, of a tree like this must be concentrated in the principal branch that thrusts so proudly toward heaven, except it isn't. I tried it the correct way 8 times, and it sat there as lifelessly as a lohan. Finally I said to myself, 'Stop trying to think, you idiot. Paint.' So I let my hand take over, and this lovely tree came to life. Do you see why?" He covered the proud principal branch, and gradually I saw what he meant. The energy of the tree didn't run that way at all. It spread out and up from the trunk, reached a knot in the branch, doubled back down the trunk, and then lifted up the far side, and throbbed with life as it reached for the sky from a tiny, insignificant branch that was barely more than a twig. Laws lie. The eyes see only what they have been conditioned to see, and the mind is a refuse pile of other people's ideas," the prince said. "Only the hand tells the truth. The hand," he cried passionately. "Trust the hand, and it will never lie to you." Master Li looked at him approvingly. "Prince, that is precisely what I wanted to talk to you about," he said. "I'm beginning to suspect that this case is one lie piled on top of another lie. But for the first time we have something to go on. You see, the criminals have told us where to look." The prince showed me where things were, and I busied myself making tea while they moved a table out to the garden. We sat outside, and after sipping his tea, Master Li said, "We know that thieves broke into the library to steal a manuscript, leading to the death of Brother Squint-Eyes. But why did they enter again last night and cause the death of Brother Shang? There seems to be only one reasonable explanation." Master Li pulled out the fragment of the Su-Ma. "This had been traced by Brother Squint-Eyes. When the criminals examined it closely, they saw the markings, and it was the copy they came back for. Thus the books ripped open and robes split at the seams and so forth. But why would they want a badly done copy that had no market value? The answer is that they weren't after the manuscript for its value to dealers. They were after it for its content. And possibly, just possibly, they may have come up empty-handed all the way around." Master Li placed the fragment on the table and tapped it with a fingernail. "It was a very brief manuscript," he said. "The odds against this fragment containing what they were after aren't as astronomical as one might think. Perhaps no more than 20 or 30 to 1, and I've bet on cricket fights with worse odds than that. Prince, did Su-Ma Xian ever visit your abominable ancestor?" The prince looked startled. "I really don't know," he said. After a moment's thought he added, "I'd be mildly surprised if he didn't. Before his fall from grace, he served as the emperor's confidant, and who better to send when a younger brother shows signs of losing his mind?" "And it is possible that the younger brother caused Su-Ma's fall and sentence of castration," Master Li wondered. "The abbot tells me that among the many uses for the monastery was that of a prison back in the jovial days of the Laughing Prince, and might that explain why the manuscript was found there?" "You mean the forgery?" the prince said, scratching his head. "An acquaintance of mine, an exceptionally saintly soul at the Eye of Tranquility, has offered an interesting hypothesis," Master Li explained. "The forgery might have been intended to frame Su-Ma with the charge of filial impiety. I was almost convinced of it, but now, thanks to you, I am even more convinced of something totally different." Master Li pointed back inside the studio at the prince's glorious paintings. "The hand! Trust only the hand!" he cried. "That very idea has been gnawing at the back of my mind for days. When I looked at the fragment and saw references to Su-Ma's father, I said, 'Fraud!' But when I looked only at the calligraphy, I said, 'Su-Ma!' You did the same thing. The hand is unmistakable, and I am now going to conclude that this isn't the world's greatest forgery, for the simple reason that it isn't a forgery at all. Su-Ma Qian set down his father's name in order to cry out to scholars, 'Look closely, something is wrong,' meaning that he had concealed his real message in some kind of code, and you and I are going to entertain ourselves by seeing who can be the first to break it." Not number 10 Ox, who couldn't decipher a single character of ancient scholarly shorthand. I got up and inwardly sneered at the fragments of dialogue that drifted to my ears. They were like children playing games, and we had serious matters to think about. "Never seen so many errors of fact in a few brief paragraphs. Deliberate, perhaps? Errors as starting points? Interesting. How many errors deal with numbers? Indeed, yes. Here he writes 146 scales of a dragon. Even I knew that a dragon has 36 evil scales and 117 good ones, which used to add up to 153 when I was in school." I sniffed contemptuously and wandered around looking at flowers. "Better break it down. 1, 4, 6... Each error probably has a direct relationship to each mention of Tan, his father's name. He was really straining here, wasn't he, comparing the marks on a stone to the 253 points of acupuncture? Didn't they realize we had 2 murdered monks on our hands, and that a strange sound was driving people out of their minds while Prince's Path was being destroyed? I decapitated a few dandelions. 1, 2, 3... "Got it!" Master Li said happily. "Ox, stop pouting and come over here." "Pouting? Me?" I walked back with dignity and peered down over Master Li's shoulder. His finger danced across the fragment. "Coded sections begin with mentions of Su-Ma's father's name and run to the next error, in fact. The numbers give the spacing between important words, and here is what we have. Downstairs, cold room, tunnel to construction site, stone in sacristy." He leaned back happily. I stared. That's all?" I said incredulously. "It's all we need, and all thieves would need, for that matter," Master Li said complacently. "Unless anyone knows of another place where a stone was kept in a sacristy, Su Ma Chien was referring to this estate. He either went or was advising someone to go down the stairs to the cold room. And somewhere there would be a tunnel that led to a construction site and the sacristy of the stone. A cold room is as far beneath the earth as one can put it. And what could be the purpose of a construction site deep under the earth?" Master Li reached into his tunic and took out a piece of cloth. I recognized it with something of a shock as being a piece of the wrapping around the mummy of the Laughing Prince. "Prince, this has faded, but one can still see that the color was imperial yellow, as it should be for the brother of an emperor," Master Li said. "However, I seem to recall that Tao Wan preceded him in death by a few months. Wouldn't your ancestor still have been in mourning for his wife?" The prince stared, and turned as purple as the implication struck him. They took a great deal longer to strike me. "Of course it should be white." "You mean I just crushed the skeleton of a total stranger?" "Cao Cao built 72 decoy tombs," Master Li said mildly. "I'm damned if I'll go through that experience 72 times!" the prince yelled. "I doubt that will be necessary," said Master Li. He looked up at me. "Wake up, Ox. The Laughing Prince amassed an incredible fortune which has never been found, and people have been buying fake treasure maps and digging holes in the Valley of Sorrows ever since. Now we have the words of Su Ma Jian, words that thieves would go to any lengths to get their hands on, because what could the Laughing Prince have been secretly constructing deep in the bowels of the earth? Dear boy, we're probably sitting on top of a tomb that contains enough loot to buy half the empire."